Dark Heroes Forever, Part 1, The Origin, Chapter 1. There are some great people in this world. The people who put others before themselves, and the people who would die to protect you. Like soldiers. Frankly, these stories I'm about to tell you have nothing to do with soldiers. Sorry to disappoint. These are focused on heroes. Not like normal, everyday heroes. I'm talking about superheroes. The ones you read about, or the ones you watched on Saturday mornings while eating sugary cereal. When I was a little girl, I had always wanted to meet one. An actual one. I never thought one day that dream would come true. I didn't think it was actually possible to gain powers. I thought the freak accidents only existed in the comic books. My name is Stevie Jones, and this is how I became a hero. The stories you're about to read are all true. Love, loss, and adventure are just the start. Brace yourself. It was October 17th, 2076. I was a senior in high school that year. I didn't favor high school very much. It was the worst 4 years of my life, to be truthful. I didn't make many friends, mainly because people thought I was kind of weird. I guess I can't blame them. I had trouble looking people in the eyes, and I stuttered too much. These small flaws caused people to frown when they'd talk to me. They probably thought I was disgusted by them, like I'm a complete snob. I'll never know. I was also very awkward in the hallways. Once other students started closing in on me, my chest would tighten and my forehead would moisten with sweat. I'd stick my elbows out and push people out of the way because I couldn't breathe. Once I was in the clear, I'd hear people calling out to me and calling me names for being in such a rush. They'll never understand. No one ever understood me, especially that year, because it was the year I met him. I missed the bus that day. It was something that was starting to become a habit, but that's not what sucked. I lived in the lowest, most dangerous part of Havenbrook City. It was all my mother could afford after my father died. Let's just keep it at that. The distance wasn't what I was worried about. It was about the people who lurked in the shadows. As I walked along the street, I gazed at a billboard with cinematic apparel. When I was a toddler, billboards had pictured advertisement. Nowadays, it's commercials. Actual ones, with sound and everything. The commercial was about some quantum mechanics class at Havenbrook University. I almost smiled. That was the class I was to be enrolled in once I graduated. My mother had been pushing me all throughout high school to take the extra mile and make the grade to get into that class. It was something I wasn't too interested in doing, but my mother knows best. I continued to walk home, the fall breeze penetrating the skin of my face and ruining my light brown locks. I buried my head in my red turtleneck as my teeth chattered. I dared to pull out my phone to text my mother with my pale and freezing fingers to tell her I had missed the bus. Again. The area I was walking into was becoming more and more vacant. Paper bags and plastic cups rolled around the concrete sidewalks and into the streets, then soon into nowhere. Hardly any cars whizzed by, somehow making me feel better. In the middle of typing the text message to my mother, I bumped into a tall man. As his instant reaction, he set his hands on my shoulders to prevent himself from falling. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with surprise. He was also in his fall getup. His coat collar covered most of his face, and he was heavily muscled. The second our eyes met, I looked away, gazing at his coat instead. His hands were large as he kept his firm grip on my shoulder. I could feel the man staring at me, and I started to grow nervous. My fault. I wasn't looking. I apologized to him, my eyes refusing to meet his. I tried to trudge forward and pass the awkward encounter, but his grasp tightened on my shoulder. Before I could say anything, he grabbed me and pushed me into the alley beside us. My shoulder slammed hard on the cold ground and my book slid out of my bag, lying right beside me. I let out a groan. As soon as I got to my feet, there were 2 men blocking my escape. The second man was holding a bat. He smacked the top of the metal weapon on his left palm repeatedly, a twisted grin evident on his rough face. The man I had bumped into grabbed my bag and looked through it as I kept my desired distance. He hung it upside down and gave it a good shake. When nothing valuable fell out of my bag, he threw it and shook his head to his friend. A bogus frown spread across his face. I spotted no empathy, no sadness. He almost seemed happy. They both looked back at me with cold stares. It made my heart leap into my throat.
What's in your pockets?
One of them asked me. He pointed the bat at me and lowered his brow. I complied by digging my hands in my pockets, shaking like a fragile leaf in the autumn wind. The whole time I stood there, I could barely think of anything else but my pounding heart. I pulled out $1.50. It was all I had, and I was terrified it wasn't enough. I showed them the small amount that lied in my hand. This is all I have, I said, my stutter growing worse. I slowly set the money on the ground and stepped backwards, hugging myself tightly. The man I bumped into walked forward and scooped up the money. He showed his friend with another bogus frown. He then threw the money to the ground furiously. The change hit the concrete with a faint clink. My dollar bill slowly followed behind it.
"You're gonna need a bit more than that,"
he told me. They began to inch themselves forward, and I felt my muscles slacking, my body going numb with fear. "Oh God, please don't hurt me," I begged as I took a trembling step backward. My back hit a brick wall and I gasped.
"Well, you gotta repay us somehow, girlie,"
the man with the bat said. In a flash, one of them grabbed my arms and I was raised in the air. His firm grip on my wrist was cold and he squeezed them as hard as he could. I cried out at the sudden pain, my feet dangling a few inches off the ground. "Let me go!" I pleaded, kicking my legs and wriggling my arms.
"Let her have it,"
he said to his partner.
"With pleasure,"
the second man replied with pure glee. He raised the bat and smacked it into my stomach, the impact of the metal object leaving me breathless. He then crouched down and struck my legs. I started to cry, my voice cracking. I felt like it wasn't enough. Someone had to hear me. "Please!" I cried. Warm tears were streaming down my face and I felt my lungs struggling to inhale air as he beat me in the chest.
"Hit her in that fat mouth of hers."
The man gripping me slurred, his breath hitting my neck and causing me to shudder. The one holding the bat smiled at me, his crooked teeth visible. He raised the bat and prepared to swing, but I noticed a shadow loom over him. Next thing we knew, a figure fell from the sky, landing just behind him. Before he could turn around, the bat was jerked out of his hands. He spun around in shock to find a tall man in black clothes. Before he could yell at the dark figure, he received a punch in the face. He stumbled back, and I could see blood leak out of his nose, like gruesome rain droplets. The blood fell next to my dangling feet. I looked up at the dark figure, who wore a black mask covering his whole face. He was almost attired as a ninja, wearing a dark hoodie and pants tucked into his combat boots. The only thing I could make out was his dark brown eyes. He looked at the men, took the bat, and threw it high above our heads. It landed on the roof of the building beside us. What a throw, I thought. The man restraining me pushed me to the ground, and I was again rendered breathless. My chest was bruised and my legs felt numb. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to watch the confrontation in front of me.
"Who the hell do you think you are?"
One of the men exasperated. He drew his arm back to punch the masked figure, but the man grabbed his fist and mercilessly crushed it. I shuddered at the sound of his shattering knuckles and the man's howls. The figure in dark clothes got in his face.
"You will walk away like this never happened, or I will hand you over to the police."
His voice was deep and intimidating, like a drill sergeant, like a fearless leader.
"We're not afraid of you,"
the second man yelled. He reached for his back pocket and whipped out a handgun. I began to scoot away in terror, my second reaction being to cover my ears. I wanted to run away so badly, but I was too petrified and intrigued by the scene in front of me. The dark figure turned around just in time for the man to pull the trigger. He fired 3 times, each bullet causing me to jump and my ears ring like crazy. The masked man zigzagged, dodging each bullet. Fearlessly, he grabbed the barrel of the pistol and dodged a bullet to the face. He twisted it to the side and kicked the man in the face as fast as lightning. I had never seen anything like it. The other man got to his feet. His fists clenched and his teeth gritted. He grabbed the dark figure's shoulder and turned him around to punch him in the face. The strange man moved his head to the side and grabbed the attacker's arm. In a flash, he threw the thug over him and his body slammed against the concrete, right on top of his friend.
"I am not going to tell you scumbags again. Leave. Now!"
The dark figure ordered through clenched teeth. Both thugs groggily stood up, groaning and holding their heads in pain. One popped his jaw in place as he stared at his partner. The others stared back, and after a few seconds of silence, they nodded at each other sternly. In a flash, they charged at the hero in black with fierce battle cries. "Look out!" I warned. It was pointless because he saw their attack coming. But I felt obligated to scream because he was just standing there. The masked man finally jumped back and raised his arms. Out of nowhere, a storm of black wind collided against the thugs and they were blown back 3 yards and into the street. My mouth dropped and I inched myself backwards. What was that? Did wind just shoot out of his hands? The thugs stood up and ran away together, each panting like dogs. I was glad they were gone, but suddenly I felt they weren't what I should have been worrying about. The strange man turned his head to me and my heart leaped into my throat. Once I saw what he was capable of, I wasn't sure if I should trust him any longer. He began to walk toward me, and all I could do was nervously sit there. Was he going to hurt me too? He crouched down, his face inches away from mine. I turned away nervously and looked at a brick wall instead. From the corner of my eye, I spotted his movement and I flinched. He took my hand and set something on my palm. I forced myself to look at my hand and I felt my heart melt. There lied my $1.50. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His brown eyes were hypnotizing, and I couldn't look away, which was strange for me. There was something beautiful about them that I couldn't tell what.
You're welcome.
He said, kindly reaching out his hand to help me stand up. I nervously took his gloved hand and accepted his kind gesture. I propped myself against the wall with a sore scowl. My everything hurt, and I felt my chest burn as I took in a deep sigh. I brushed the dirt off myself just before turning to thank my hero, but to my surprise, he was gone. I didn't even get to thank him.
Miss Jones, pay attention.
My professor snapped abruptly, causing me to jump and escape my trance.
I have an actual time machine in class, and you can continue to stare out the window.
I sat up straighter and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Blushing, I refused to meet his gaze. I had been daydreaming once again. I'm sorry, Dr. Burkett, I apologized nervously. My teacher arched a brow and turned back to the time machine, continuing his lecture. Despite being snapped at by my professor, I gazed back at the window. I couldn't stop thinking about the hero that saved my life, which was already a year ago. After the whole ordeal happened, no one believed me, not even my mother. I didn't blame her, though. The whole thought of a hero with wind abilities did seem like something from my imagination. Word got out and I was picked on about it until graduation. Screw them. They weren't there, I thought.
Well, it's 12 o'clock. Class is dismissed.
My professor announced. My attention was immediately directed toward him and I rolled my eyes. Damn it! I never listened to one word he said throughout the entire class. I gathered my books and walked up to the time machine to get a better view.
Isn't it beautiful?
Dr. Burkett asked me, throwing his bag over his shoulder. I nodded politely. It sure is, I said. Mind if I stay and finish my notes? My professor sighed with a shrug.
I suppose. Next time, pay attention, Miss Jones.
He warned me with a stern expression. He was a bald man with round glasses and a white shirt. He always wore white.
And don't mess with the time machine yet. It still has some bugs.
He said. He collected his stuff and left to grab a bite to eat. I turned to the contraption in front of me. It was a large circular metal structure with a platform underneath, big enough for someone to walk inside. In the year of 2077, time travel was becoming a big deal. Scientists were hired by the government to improve the past and make the world a better place. My teacher just recently became one of those scientists. Soon he was to retire as a professor at the Havenbrook University, once his time machine was done. Some people didn't trust the government. Others didn't trust the men doing the job. I myself was skeptical about what we could do to the past. Soon, it could be my career path, just like it was my father's. My dad dreamed of becoming a life-changing scientist through quantum mechanics. After he graduated college, he met my mother, and sooner or later, they were married. In 2058, I was born. We were very happy for a while. Sadly, that happiness ended right after I turned 7. One fateful night, my dad called my mother and I and told us he was walking to his car. He had just left the lab. After a few hours, he never showed up. My mom called his phone constantly, praying over and over that he would respond, but each call was the same. Soon, there was a knock on the door and I ran to it, eagerly squealing with excitement to see my dad. But once I opened it, I was sad to see it was a police officer. He told my mother and I that my dad was found in a pool of blood next to his car. When they found him, it was too late. He was dead. I'll never know exactly what happened to my father. All I know is that he died, alone and in pain. Shaking the sad thoughts away, I peered from behind the machine and spotted the power cord sprawled on the floor tiles. Temptation had grabbed me with its malicious grasp, and I found myself plugging the time machine as I dreamed of what it would do. I mean, what was the harm in plugging it up? A huge light blue orb surrounded the metal circle. It was so beautiful, and it was beginning to blind me. Temptation, again, had me. My fingertip only inches away from the light. I started to feel something tingle inside me. I feel like something had grabbed me. The light was sucking me in. I tried to pull my hand away, but the light stretched out to me and touched my fingertip. Within seconds, my whole arm was swallowed by the blinding light. All of a sudden, my body started trembling violently and my vision grew hazy. I felt a strong jolt shoot through my body, causing me to cry out. I felt as if my body was sucking up some sort of energy. I was blown back 2 yards into the classroom. My back landed on a lab table and the sound of breaking glass emanated somewhere around me. I flipped off the table and landed on my head, instantly passing out. My head was pounding, my vision was hazy, and my whole body was tingling. I opened my eyes and slowly sat up, holding my beating head with a cringe-plastered face. Pieces of broken glass were stuck to my hands and arms from beakers and tubes I had landed on. I stood up. Balancing myself on the lab table, I fell over. My head wouldn't stop beating. The ringing in my ears was endless. I couldn't stop my body from shaking. How could I have been so stupid? I dug my knuckles into my eyelids tiredly, trying to get my vision back. I couldn't help but feel a strange tingling sensation in my skin, almost like an itch you can't reach. When I opened my eyes, I looked down at myself and instantly wished I hadn't. My veins, they were glowing a light blue. What's happening to me? I asked myself, looking at my hands in horror. I was trembling. Was I going to die? Was my body getting ready to explode? Why were my veins glowing blue? I couldn't walk out of the university looking like that. I slid it over my arms and hugged myself. I was completely terrified. I unplugged the machine. No one should ever hear about this, especially my professor. I had to go home. I had to forget all of this ever happened. I grabbed my stuff and fled the room. I looked down at my hands and shoved them in my pockets. I didn't want anyone spotting them as I quickly walked down the halls. I threw my hood over my head and looked at the floor most of the way to my apartment, my body growing weak again. I felt like my body was going to give up on me. I wanted to go to the hospital, but I hesitated. What would the government do if they found out I had messed with a time machine? What if I unknowingly altered the past? What if I got arrested? I fought against the hospital, even if it meant I could die. No one could know I touched that time machine. Not the government, not my professor, and not my mother. I picked up the pace with all the energy I could muster and shakenly got to my apartment. I trembled as I grabbed my keys and opened the door. Just a few more steps. You can fall asleep in bed, I thought. It was too late. Just as I shut the door, my muscles slackened and my legs went numb. Exhausted, I collapsed to the floor with a moan. The last thing that went through my mind was the thought that I might never wake up.